at the end of Mercury retrograde. Yes, we did start this project during Mercury retrograde, and we survived. Today is the day it went straight, and we're going to be talking about all that energy. And I am here with Reverend Don as we take a look at the pagan world. And I
Yes,
want to
indeed.
appreciate everybody who listened to last night's show, but all the ideas of multiverse and parallel realities. But lately, last week on Wednesday, we began dealing with the idea of how do we fund our community? How do we increase our ability to have money in our community? And so we're going to dedicate Wednesdays to the idea of, of, of that value of how do we start looking at our community in so many ways. Um, and yes, my camera is going intermittently in and out, so it'll be interesting. So it'll be odd for the Metaverse Day. Um, And let me go ahead and start with is that let's go ahead and deal with where I think the hardest two things I keep hearing over and over again. One, there is a poverty mentality in paganism that we are poor people by nature. We come from the poor countryside, covered with our dirty faces and our dirt under our nails or whatever, and that we are somehow unable or unwilling to be not, you know, even making money. But also that the idea that we're just this idea of that we're these sort of like purposely and intentionally dirty little hippies who don't care about money. And there's a little bit of the truth in that. What do you think, Don?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that for a specific generation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's still hanging around to some extent. But if you look at the undulations of the pagan revival in the last several centuries,
Mm-hmm.
that is certainly not a constant. It
Mm-hmm.
really does have a lot to do with the 60s. It certainly has nothing to do with paganism in antiquity. The idea that there was anything wrong with prosperity was not present there. If you
Mm-hmm.
look at the Karnak temple complex, that will make it immensely obvious just by itself. If you look at the wealth of artwork that survives from the ancient world, these were not things that were being picked up at rummage sales. They were a huge outpouring of effort um, and money built through prosperity. Um, Ancient pagans were very concerned with prosperity, and they certainly did not have an idea that it was more virtuous to be poor. Um, Now, certain of the Eastern religions do look upon the idea of spiritual liberation as being tied to the renunciation of physical things. Um, so, if we're talking about that end of the community, that's another matter. That does go back a long way. But most of Western paganism doesn't actually espouse that point of view, and yet they somehow seem to hold it. Um,
Well, it
and I
also
think, yeah.
I think it also comes in part. So part of it, I think, is that they were afraid of being charged with fraud for things, like for
Hmm.
tarot readings. A long time, it was criminal to actually give a tarot reading. You get
Hmm.
arrested for it. You can get charged with fraud. And so
Hmm.
you would say that, oh, you had to do it for free. You had to
Hmm.
give it away, that you couldn't charge for it. And they
And
made
that was a
that,
protective measure.
and they treated it like a religious measure.
Hmm.
Then somehow it was better for that, not the idea of, um, the idea of it being valued. That somehow that would make it all better. And so the second thing is, and they say that this is the other thing that makes it very hard for pagans, is we don't believe in the tithe.
Hmm.
And I think tithing, I actually started looking up tithing today to figure out where it came from. And
Hmm.
it's really old. I mean, it's
Hmm.
older than Christianity. It's older than Catholicism. It's older than Judaism even. And it
Hmm.
comes out of the idea of giving the king a certain portion and the church a certain portion of your crops.
Hmm.
And I really think it was a very smart economic measure for people who had that sort of religious practice.
Hmm.
And so very ancient. It
Hmm.
predates Christianity. But it
Well,
also
when you
created.
had religious centers, you had to have a way to keep them up.
Hmm.
And it was just that simple. If you look again at ancient Egypt, one of the things that commonly happened, they believed in the ancestral worship, and they often wanted to have that done not only in their family but in the temple. They wanted their ancestors included in that temple, but they had to pay for that privilege,
Hmm.
and they often did it by leaving land to the temple to compensate them for that daily ritual. So it's not at all a new idea, and certainly not absent from ancestral paganism.
So we've gotten this idea that money's not great, fairly modern. The idea of tithing is terrible because it's organized religion. Somehow we can't handle that. And I guess the idea of it, so that comes up to the third object that breaks the pagan economy is that we have any. It's getting stuck in my throat. See, all of this money talk is
Hmm.
like the gods are saying, don't talk about money. No, no, they're not happening at all. But that the idea of it is that we shouldn't need money. Somehow this will be provided to us, that our spirit will provide. And it's never true. I mean, we have to get our own resources.
Mm.
And the idea that our gods don't need money. They need worship, but they don't need money. So why should we give money to our high priest and high priestess?
Well, I think one of the things that doesn't get the amount of attention it deserves is that a lot of people come to modern paganism from Christianity and never actually leave Christianity. They continue to have the same ideas that they don't bother to examine or heal. One of which is the idea of money being bad, because that's a prominent point of view in many forms of Christianity. Um, the famous misquote, "Money is the source of all evil," which is not the actual quote, but what most people from that background will say. And of course, the other is the reaction against the idea of organized religion because they felt burned by the one they came out of, um, and never moved on from that. And this is why shadow work is so very important.
So it leads us to what I feel like is the big conclusion is that in order for us to succeed at paganism, we utilize market techniques.
Hmm.
We buy, and so our high priesthood, instead of being servicing the gods and maybe getting paid a small amount of money to do ancestral worship, um, and I think Roma G's Papa G does a really good job. He does rituals, and he people
Hmm.
pay him to do rituals, and he does them, and he films them, and he sends them out, and he does it on an
Hmm.
almost daily basis. And a lot of Voodons I've known do that, and a lot of Hoodoo do that,
Hmm.
and so we see
And
that.
that's a community with a very different attitude toward money.
Yeah. Um, Boy, I'm not set in the multiverse today. The metaverse does not want me necessarily talking today. I'm noticing that. So you have this idea so that people get paid for spells, and then of course we've seen this. If they ask for too much or do to become too greedy or anything else, then the world comes down on them. The police come out and call it fraud.
Hmm.
So we don't have a really good measure of where is it good to ask, where is it bad to ask, and then when does it become a fraud?
Hmm.
We just recently reported on an individual who took over $50,000, but their big act is they did not fulfill the spell. They didn't give them the last thing they needed, which was that tabernacle
Hmm.
that they had picked out. And
I believe I remember that story, and I would have to agree it was an act of fraud because they did not fulfill what they were contracted to do.
that's correct.
Had they fulfilled it, I think it would be an entirely different conversation.
Right, but they did not. And
Yeah.
the person spent a fortune to buy a very nice tabernacle that was supposed to be prepared and everything else. Whether that would have been a ripoff if they had provided it, I don't know. Because
Hmm. But it's
magnificent
a
pieces,
different conversation.
but they did not supply it. So we do have these practitioners who do take a lot of money for spells, who never perform the spells.
Well, and then we have people like the Tomato Lady of Elgin,
Oh
if you
yes,
remember that.
I will never forget it. And to give an example of it, we were called in while we are doing. I was called in when I was doing Pagan Tonight Radio and Psychic Chicago Radio. Let's be very clear, Psychic Chicago Radio, predecessor to Pagan Tonight Radio, where I was buying airtime. And the police came to me and they said, "We have this person. We don't know how they're doing it, but they're ripping people off." And
Mm-hmm.
they sent me in. We set it up, and I basically debunked the person. I basically that, and it's called the
Mm-hmm.
tomato lady of that because they would send you home with a tomato. They would rub it all over your body. You would take it, then they would take it back, and then somehow they would then squish it, and a small skull or a small piece of bone would come out, or something else would come out of it,
Mm-hmm.
and and then they would hand an envelope full of money, and so we did that with the police, and the police caught them. But what they
Mm-hmm.
smashed, and the bonus is they didn't realize they had a carpenter's hook in their hand. And so when they grabbed that tomato, they cut into it, and then they pushed that in there, and they would do that. But they would use tricks like that, egg tricks, and
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of tricks to give you the idea that you were cursed, and
Mm-hmm.
only and that your money was cursed. And the big fraud is they would hand you they would hand an envelope and they would do it, put it in a box and do all the blessings over it, then hand it back to you and tell you not to open it until the full moon.
Mm-hmm.
And when you would open it, you would get all this paper. It was cursed, and so yeah, there's all
Well,
sorts
another
of.
one is where they have to burn the money in the cemetery at midnight, but you can't be present.
Hmm.
And of course, they don't in fact burn the money.
No.
They simply take it, and these are actual frauds, and they give everyone a bad name,
Hmm.
but they don't resemble the general practices of our community.
And so another thing that makes it is that, and this is the Stripe argument, the Etsy argument, the eBay
Mm-hmm.
argument, and where there's enough people who get buyer's remorse after getting a reading and everything else that it becomes a high level. Readings become a very high level of fraud charges and other types of ideas. So why is Stripe not good, and why you have to watch for Etsy or even credit cards? Almost
Mm-hmm.
all of these have an anti-psychic, anti-reading element to it. PayPal, most people don't. Well, if you're a reader on PayPal and sending money through it, they can shut you down at any time. Stripe has shut down people, number of people.
Mm-hmm.
So in most of our legal system, most of our financial system, we do have the readers who are like hiding the fact that they're collecting money through readings through these automated systems, or
Mm-hmm.
aren't even aware how illegal it can be. We
Mm-hmm.
used to sell a lot of readings and memberships through eBay, and they stopped
Mm-hmm.
us because not because we did anything wrong, but because the high level of returns on those. A lot of people going to their credit cards, people not returning the money, and
Mm-hmm.
so we see readings is the number one source of income. And this is very interesting. People, I know you could probably make a lot more money if you do more readings. Don
Mm-hmm.
practically does no readings anymore, and he also does them for charity. But
Mm-hmm.
that's about the only time he does it. He does them for a certain amount of charity work, but he doesn't do it for his own thing. I actually did readings today for donations. I actually did
Yes.
okay for hi Maggie and hi everybody, Maria and all of them.
Hi,
Um,
Maggie.
yeah, so that was really kind of cool. And so that it is. So in order to have our clergy, they have to sell themselves, or to have a group, you have to sell something. So we're constantly caught in these fundraisers, making soap, making incense, selling classes. The people get
Mm-hmm.
mad when you sell classes, doing tarot card readings. So we're financing our community through everything else. So we have to spend a lot of time on everything else to give them enough cash for them to hand it to the community in doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And so a small amount of it. And so this is the first real error. The lack of tithing, the lack of not tithing. I don't care if you tithe or not. And I get why not, but the lack of tithing, the lack of the idea of donations, the lack of an idea of supporting services such as spell work and things on your behalf, thinking condemning this a lot, the things that money's bad, and then on top of it, you have to give everything away. These are all really bad little images that
Mm-hmm.
really reduce our community to shatters. So, who are the biggest and most powerful leadership in our community? People who write books,
Mm-hmm.
and there are the few who really then have to go out and sell their books, and then do so, they build a ministry around their books. And so book writing is a very important. So important is it that we ourselves work through Llewellyn, work through their process
Hmm.
to have our rights returned so that we can publish our books ourselves because we want
Hmm.
control over that. And part of it is definitely a financial argument.
Oh yes.
For the thousands of books that were sold through Llewellyn, you got pennies on the dollar for it. You know, people don't realize you only
Mm.
get 10 cents on the dollar. I think you got 10 cents. You were 10% author,
I'm not sure,
but I'm almost
but
90.
I mean, it
And then
wasn't too
that
far off of that either way.
right, and then you're 10% author of what Llewellyn sells it for, not what it sells in the retail stores.
Hmm.
So if it's a $30 book, and Llewellyn sells it to the publishers at $16, you got paid from the $16, not the 30.
Hmm.
And then when they sell the books through Amazon, which is the worst deal, let me tell you, Amazon insists on a 33% cover price.
Hmm.
They if you want to charge them more than 33% cover price, they wouldn't take your books. So that would mean to the author of a $30 book, they're getting $1 a book sold through Amazon.
Hmm.
This is not financially feasible. I still, it's hard. I mean, people still go through Llewellyn for a lot of reasons, but it's hard. And so we took on the publishing ourselves, the right to publish
Hmm.
ourselves. And Amazon's made it very easy with zero manufacturing.
Yeah, for
And
that,
we,
Amazon is great.
right. And if we can sell them, we're getting 4, 5, 6, 7, $8 a book,
Hmm.
right, from the rights of just selling them.
Yeah.
Not even fulfilling if they do it. So that's a huge difference from like Llewellyn. Now the distribution level, you go, oh, it's much different. Well, yeah, you have to you have to go in there and become a bookseller. But let me be honest, self-publishing books brings you a bigger profit per book.
Hmm. So you may still make more money by selling fewer.
Right. And the fact is Llewellyn may have a great distribution system, but are they really selling your books? Are they really pushing them? And after the first, so the day most authors make the most money is on the first day the book is available.
Hmm.
That first check is usually the biggest check the authors will ever see for a single book. Not always true, but for a majority of authors. Most people don't realize most books sell less than 200 books in the United States. That book selling is not a lucrative thing, but yet we give honor to those who write books. We give them
Hmm.
the respect of the books. We think we're doing them a favor. We're practicing them by buying the books, by selling them the books, and everything else. So we're very caught up in that as part of our economy. And
Hmm.
this is where we're going to start solving some problems. So the idea of the economy group here, the Pagan Economy Club, which will meet every Wednesday on the Daily Spell,
Yeah.
unless people want more, is to begin discussing it. And I think that's a great place to start. Are you better off going with a publisher or going off with yourself? And the answer is what is your goals
Hmm.
for
And your skill set.
and your skill set? What does publishing through Llewellyn give you? Well, you lose a lot of control over your material. We had a very unusual contract for our books. We could run them all
Yeah.
on because they'd already been published. We'd already have a base for it.
Mm.
We had a good base,
Well,
and we were
and our contract was a co-publishing contract,
mhm.
which I believe
Well,
was unique in their history.
yeah, and they would come on to have others, but we just never could bring it to fruition because of various reasons.
Mm.
One, because money,
Hmm.
the lack thereof. Um, so you take it a step further. So that what do you want to? Can you distribute? Can you sell? And most people don't know how to sell. Most people don't distribute. So going with a
Mm.
publisher, if you don't have a distribution chain, if you don't have additional editors, if you don't have the means to get everything together, a publisher is a great thing. But what you're doing is you're giving up the majority of the income from that book to the
Mm.
publisher to do all these jobs. Period.
Mm. And you mentioned editing, which is very important
Mm-hmm.
and something that people do have trouble doing for their own work
Mm-hmm.
on occasion. Um, but if you are going to self-publish, you want to make sure that you have edited it as well as you possibly can.
Sure, and there are ways to do so.
Hmm. And there are automatic
Hmm.
grammar programs and the like that can be of help. Although I
Hmm.
would say you want to still preserve your own voice, but they can be a considerable help.
And now with these services like Lulu,
Hmm.
like Amazon and other self-publishing things, you can get a small amount of publishing done.
Yeah.
The fact is, remember, you're not likely to write a bestseller.
Hmm.
And if you do, how much work are you going to put into it? So that's a real argument. You know,
And what is the number one rule of publishing your own book? Stick rhinestones all over the cover.
yeah, I don't think people will understand. People who have followed us know what that reference to is. But
Mm,
so so one of the biggest things you need to do if you're going to it. So I would tell groups that they need to write, and, if it's a small amount, you can write now today. You can write your manuals for your book, your own hymn book,
mhm,
your own materials books for your groups, and distribute it even to a small amount of people at a profit
mhm,
to fund it, so that we can do that. That can be done. So that's a big thing in the economy. So if you're going to be a publisher, you have to just publish a book. You have to decide what you want. To go with a Llewellyn or a Wiser, it means you're letting the company take you as a process, and then take the majority of the money away. But they are going to get your book distributed, and they don't even do they do a mediocre to fair job of promoting you. But that does give you status in the community,
mhm,
which does get you speaking engagements. That does
mhm.
get you the idea in the old days was that when you wrote a record, you never really made all that much money from a record in and of itself. You did
Yeah.
it from the concerts, you did it from the T-shirt sales, you did it from your merch.
Mhm,
So a book is really an introduction to your right to be represented out there in the world, and distributing through a publisher will give you the clout necessary to make you eligible, at least eligible to get paid for
mhm,
speaking arrangements and others. Some people make a lucrative income. The majority of us do not. None of this is really healthy for us, but that's the other side of it.
mhm,
I know a number of authors who then go out and make art
mhm,
to sell, or to sell on monetizing their name, or do spell kits, or there is starting to be this idea of branding that that you're able to take your book and brand it and make kits for it and do other things. So I think that is something we are going to see more of. So in this first session, we're telling you that you really have to look at how you're earning your money. If you're going to be an author, how you going to do it,
mhm,
and what are you going to do? In our case, we already had a group,
mhm,
and we're putting out books ourselves through this zero manufacturing system, and we're
mhm.
doing it because we do have a distribution system.
Yes.
And for less, for like selling less like 1/10 of the books that Llewellyn was selling, we're seeing the same sort of amount of royalty.
Yeah.
So we have a lot more leverage to work with. A good example of a book that we just brought out. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but the omnibus, and
Yes.
we bring it out as an art book, a more expensive art book. I mean, it's probably the in the cost of a real art book, and
Mhm,
it exists out there. And yeah, in a couple of days, it's going to end. Our first real thing was the Kickstarter.
mhm.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, Reverend Don's Super Omnibus of Incantations and Invocations for All Occasions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Kickstarter, the address is in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Make 100 project at Kickstarter, and it's coming out as a limited edition, first edition copy. Has not been printed as a book previously, and it replicates and expands upon, to some extent, the omnibus that was put out as a downloadable feature 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what it is, it's full of spells and artwork. And the artwork runs the gamut from some things dating all the way back to the 1970s up to things that were done just for this volume.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, on one hand, an art book, on another hand, a spell book. Um, in theory, you could use it as a coloring book. All
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things you could do with it. But This particular edition, there will only be so many made. They will be signed and numbered and dated, and
Hmm.
they are collectible.
And so you're answering to your financial thing by
Hmm.
creating a collectible where there's more margin and profit than you would say going to a publisher,
Yes.
and you have a big enough audience to do so.
And,
And
I can't imagine any of the metaphysical publishers having published this particular volume
hmm
because it's so far afield from what they normally do. And
hmm
yet people are quite happy to be getting it.
and so in our economy club, so the other thing that you can do is learn to sell other people's books. If you're, it's feel
Hmm.
free to sell their books and collect their books. So the books have a lot of value. So books are really one of the cornerstones of our pagan economy. Let's just be honest. It's the most common denominator in paganism. That's the most. It's the lowest common denominator. What do all pagans seem to enjoy? Well,
Hmm.
by far, you can talk about the god, you can talk about goddesses, you can talk about all of it. You can talk about fighting. You can talk about, yes, they love fighting, arguing over things or having their opinions and pontificating and doing all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, the thing that we value most is books.
Hmm. I would have to agree with that.
But we don't value books very much, do we? We ignore the value of what we would call the first editions.
Hmm.
The reason we're bringing out a special book first edition is not for today, though it's
Hmm.
very cool to have. But we're expecting that over time, as more people come into the community, they may want these old books.
Hmm.
What's a first edition Gardner book, High Magic, worth?
Hmm.
$300 to $500 in perfect condition, and that's
Hmm.
really underpriced compared to other sort of high in demand books.
Yes.
What's an old Sybil Leak book worth? As we go into more and more of the community, as we teach the history, what's a first edition Penzac book worth? I mean,
It's a good question.
what is it? If we do know the answer for our comb bound white paper Xerox versions of some of the original manuals, people would want them for the collection. We'll pay. I've seen one go for $65. I've seen them go for $85. I've seen one
Hmm.
go for $125. So what we don't respect a lot of times is the idea that books have value, increasing value, and we throw them away. We give them away.
Hmm.
They no longer exist. They don't. Nobody really deals with it. Um, you know, they end up in secondhand shops. So while we value the idea of the book and the author as a way to get us into the community and bring some income in, we do not pay attention very much to the collectability of these books,
I
the
would have to
value of
agree with that.
the value of a library. So one of the biggest things you can do for generational wealth, right,
Hmm.
is begin that process.
And another thing with our metaphysical books,
Hmm
I mean, if you are looking for rare metaphysical books from, say, the late 19th century, the early 20th century, most of them were very limited runs. There never were that many of them to start with,
hmm
and many of them have not survived. Which means that some of those rare metaphysical books are very valuable,
And they
and
will
that will
become
be true in the future.
so buying books, sharing books are all a traditional way of earning income, and so we need to pay more attention to that.
Mm,
Let's not ignore that fact that the books are our cornerstone. And producing your book today, you can do it very quickly. You can do it that. Does that so? Let me ask you a very simple question, Don.
mhm.
Um, do you think that it lowers the value that so many people are bringing out books today? I'm hearing so many people, oh, they're bringing so much books. There's so much junk. There's so much out there. And do you think it's lowering the value of books in general? That the value of these authors are putting
No, I
out so
think the
much
good
more?
ones will still be worth what they were always worth.
Hmm
I do think it's true that it will always be a certain percentage that appreciate in value, the ones who remain in demand, and they're not necessarily the ones you'd think. Um, but I don't think the mere fact that there are more metaphysical books in any way lowers the value
hmm
of the whole. If anything, I think it probably increases it by increasing the number of people who are looking for
hmm And so I think that's that.
Yeah,
Tawny Kate, go ahead.
yeah, Tawny is asking if we were raising money by selling books. Actually, we're discussing raising money by
Money
selling
by
books
selling
and why
books.
this can be a good thing.
We're talking about in general to the community. And so let me rehash it. So we do
Mm,
believe that the fact is that we don't see a lot of tithing in our community. We don't see a lot of ways to support people. So one of the things we tend to do is that we tend to give authors a lot more weight, and that we use book finding, books as a primary source. We see authors and leadership as writing books as the primary source, and it's a very poor source of income for the majority of them. They don't generally see a lot of cash from it, and it's a diminishing return. So they're constantly having to bring out more books, and another book, and another book to keep their finances up.
mm,
In today's world, you have to make a decision going with a publisher in which you get only a tiny, almost insignificant fraction of the overall cover
mm,
in exchange for handing them the right to edit, to distribute, to handle all of that. And the fact is, most of those authors won't see very big checks. They'll be lucky if they see a couple of $1,000s in a year. If they're lucky, most books don't sell that well. But you can also do through these new systems such as Lulu and Kindle and other systems of publishing. You can publish directly and see really much larger amount of money per individual books. But and not touching them, but what you're giving up is that distribution machine. That you have to get your own editors, you have to get your own writers, you have to get your own stuff, and we've made that kind of thing. So we are earning money that way. But somewhere in this whole process is that you talk about people who want to have ritual centers, and they end up being in the back of bookstores.
mm,
So the bookstore is already there. And so we see books is the most common denominator, but then we see people ignoring the value of the first edition. They don't look
mm,
at their own collection. So it seems to be, oh, we're giving this money, we're getting a book in exchange, but really are doing it to support the author. We're doing it for various reasons. And we're not reading all these books. I know people who are not reading all these books, but they feel like that's a significant contribution to the writer, to the author, where in fact it's really just lining the pockets of the publishers.
mm,
The fact is, the majority of the money never sees the community, and the fact is, the majority of publishers don't really contribute back to the community in a significant way. They're not holding money back to help authors. They're not doing all of this. They're not really doing, in my opinion, even a great job of production. And so we're always fighting in this energy,
mm.
and it did it again.
It did
Rev,
it again.
hey, you have not touched anything.
Well,
The metaverse is acting up on
the
me again.
matrix is
It's
glitching.
glitching. Yeah. And so that's what we're talking about. If then we don't see the value of our books. We don't treat them, we buy them for cultural reasons. We're
Mm,
buying them for personal reasons. We're doing it for investing in the author. Like Christopher Penzick does a great job. But we're not buying the books. We're buying the books for that, maybe because we like what we're reading, but we're also buying them to be supporting of that author, that leader.
mm,
We are doing that. You see them all the time. And same true of musicians. We'll talk about that another time. But tonight we're talking about the author. And what do you see? You see the authors all sit around. You'll see at a little picnic. They come down there and they all have their tables full of books.
yeah.
So they're constantly forced into, instead of doing the things that they may be really good at, which is ritual that helped them write the book, or being
Mm,
involved in the community, or organizing the community, or doing anything else, they're having to go back and write another book and sell their books, and this is how they're going to support themselves while trying
mm,
to do pagan things. And so we ask, why don't we have paid clergy? Well, then we do. Um, Whatever. And so we have this sort of issue. Somebody in our chat is talking about how Llewellyn and they worked, and we're not into basically talking about the insides of Llewellyn tonight. How they work is a choice. You have a choice to do it, and the choice is: do you hand over? Can you get your book distributed? Can you get that status? And like we've said, if you get a Llewellyn published book, You're more likely to get speaking engagements. You're more likely to get tables. You're more likely to get this sort of thing, unless you can figure a way to grab attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, there it is. And then we're not valuing, on top of it, we're not valuing the value of the books later in life. We don't realize how few distributed, how few of them actually were printed,
Mm-hmm.
and how that now against a large, ever increasing number of Wiccans, of the ever increasing pagans, ever increasing amount of practitioners, how that value of that book continues.
Mm-hmm.
If because some of these books would be the only books these authors write, and some of them were like less than 1,000.
Yeah.
Um, Future Shock, Future Magic by Phil Farber. There's only of the original set. There's only 2,000 copies in existence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some other magic, like Candle Magic, by Jane R., who you may never heard, is one of the best books you've read.
Mm-hmm.
There are only 2,000 of them ever printed, and a lot of them never saw the light of day because they were sold to distributors, and a lot of them were destroyed in bankruptcies of various
Mm-hmm.
distributors. You so you don't know how many of them. So a good library is a good generational wealth investment, and it's a good historical investment.
Mm-hmm.
So
It absolutely is.
we need to think beyond just the book. What does it mean to our community? And the Pagan Economy Club, that is what we're going to start talking about, is how to create more wealth in our community, how to create more generational of that. How do we distribute more? And we'll have more on that. But I think we covered it pretty well today. What do you think?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. And
Mm-hmm.
thank you for everybody who's been in the chat room and discussing. Tomorrow night, we're going to come back with tarot. We're going to actually try to do some tarot stuff. Yes, if you want a tarot reading, write us at peggyworldtv@gmail.com or go on to the Daily Spell and one of ours will say, yeah, me a reading. We're not going to take it off the edge because we know how that goes. We've done so many readings over phones,
Mm-hmm.
over shows that we will set it up. But if you want a reading tomorrow night, let us know, and we may do a reading for you. And we'll as we
Yes.
continue. And next Wednesday we'll continue on the Pagan Economy Club. We've now talked about books. A lot of this applies to me that we're going to start talking about how to raise money through crowdfunding. And talking about crowdfunding, check out our Kickstarter campaign and
Yes.
see how you're going to do it. And we're going to come back. Pagan World's going to start their own Kickstarter campaign on February 9th. And if you got any ideas of what you'd like to see for that, that'd be terrific. Any last thoughts, Don?
Um, I think my only last thought on this is that you cannot have a healthy community unless you in fact have a healthy community, and part of that is reasonable prosperity. If you deliberately starve your if you starve yourself, you're going to be unhealthy. If you starve your community, it will be unhealthy. We need to find ways to feed the community to help it to thrive if it's going to do so.
Absolutely. And talking about that, we want to wish everybody out there good luck. The Parliament's starting to hone down their pieces.
Hmm.
Uh, Lori Blackman, congratulations on Lori Blackman for getting the illustration. We'll talk a little bit more of that. Melanie Silver for getting, I think she's in Women and the Invisible Jobs of Ritual, the Invisible Labors of Women in Ritual. I think
Yes.
that's fascinating. That was her thesis for that, the beadwork and the costuming, and she was talking about that. So she's gotten accepted. I know that several people, including ourselves, Journey to the Parliament, have
Hmm.
been told they're still working on it. We'll see,
Yes.
but we'll talk more about that soon. But tomorrow we'll talk tarot. So next week we'll continue on with our economy, and whatever you want to hear from us, let us know.
Yes, indeed.
Wow, it's crazy. It's a crazy night tonight for
Yes,
me.
it is.
I'm really glowing tonight too. On top of it.
Yes, you are.
Something's sparking up my universe, but that's okay. It's the end of Mercury retrograde, and I think with that, Don, why don't you finish us off with a prayer, and we will be back tomorrow with tarot. Tarot.
Yes, indeed. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us as we go forward, to go forward in strength and prosperity and joy in our lives. Help us to nurture our lives and to nurture our community so that it is strong and happy and nurtures us in turn. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to do this. We thank you with love and with respect. And may you blessed be, and may you blessed be. Until next time.